Let us begin our examination of the current state of evolutionary theory, the societal reactions to it, and the profound scientific debates that are currently reshaping our understanding of life's history. We must first address the context in which these discussions are arising, specifically within the socio-political landscape of the Russian Federation, before we descend into the intricacies of genetics, epigenetics, and the extended evolutionary synthesis. In recent discourse, we have observed a peculiar phenomenon regarding public prohibitions. There are voices in the public sphere calling for legislative bans on a wide array of items and concepts. Some advocate for the prohibition of shawarma prepared with mayonnaise. Others focus their ire on cultural artifacts like the Barbie doll. A third group targets the subculture known as quadrobers, individuals, typically children, who mimic animal movements. Others still wish to censor Turkish television dramas or restrictive computer games. However, amidst this cacophony of proposed restrictions, a specific and distinct call has emerged: the proposal to ban the teaching of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution in schools. This initiative was recently articulated by a figure of significant past political weight, a former journalist who ascended to the role of premier of the Chechen Republic and currently serves as an assistant to the chairman of the government of the Russian Federation. The rationale provided for this proposed erasure of scientific curriculum is that Darwinism, as it is colloquially termed by its detractors, allegedly contributes to the spiritual decay of children. It is important to analyze the weight of this statement. It comes from a recently appointed official who, strictly speaking, lacks significant executive powers in this domain and possesses no legislative initiative. Despite the bureaucratic limitations of the speaker, the statement resonated deeply, provoking a reaction from the intelligentsia. Many enlightened individuals, including the noted biologist and science communicator Alexander Panshin, interpreted this administrative gesture as yet another piece of evidence confirming a long-standing hypothesis that religion and science are fundamentally incompatible, or at least, that they coexist with great difficulty. However, if we are to accept the logic that the theory of evolution must be banned to ensure the spiritual safety or general safety of the youth, a logic shared by those who wish to ban children from dressing as animals and running on all fours, we must pause. Officials, politicians, and public figures often cloak their initiatives in the rhetoric of fighting for happiness or ensuring safety. But we, as analytical observers, are under no obligation to accept their definitions at face value. By adopting their rhetoric, we risk trapping our own reasoning within a coordinate system they have artificially constructed. This acceptance can radically distort our own worldview, blinding us to the objective reality of the situation. And what is that objective reality regarding the teaching of evolution? If we look closely, we might fail to notice a critical fact. In the textbooks currently used to teach biology to children in Russia today, textbooks that adhere to the federal state educational standard, the government-approved gold standard mandatory for execution, the theory of Darwin is arguably already absent. I invite you to verify this independently. If one were to download and peruse the mandatory biology textbooks for grades 5 through 9, one would find a curious pattern. I have performed this analysis personally. In these texts, the word evolution appears frequently. However, mere repetition does not equate to substantive explanation. Just as a non-religious person might use phrases like "thank God," "God forbid," or "my God" as figures of speech without attributing to them any theological weight or belief, These textbooks invoke evolution without imbuing it with scientific meaning. Let us examine the progression. In the 5th grade, students are told that living organisms constantly develop and change, adapting to the conditions of life around them. This is a descriptive statement, not a mechanistic one. It leaves the student asking, how? Do they simply run faster to catch food? The mechanism is absent. In the 6th grade, the definition expands slightly but remains opaque. Evolution is defined as irreversible historical development of living nature. It states that organisms acquire traits that ensure survival, and that these traits are transmitted from generation to generation. Again, the critical questions, how are they acquired? Why are they transmitted? Remain unanswered. The curriculum for the 7th and 8th grades repeats these axioms without deepening them. It is only in the 9th grade that the text approaches the origin of humanity. Here, the names Lamarck and Darwin are finally invoked. However, they are cited primarily as historical figures, the authors of theories regarding human origins. The text does not explain what their theories actually postulated. There is no detailed exposition of natural selection, no breakdown of how divergence occurs, no explanation of the struggle for existence as Darwin articulated it. The concept of natural selection is not mentioned, even in passing, in any of the mandatory textbooks of the new standard. The synthetic theory of evolution, the integration of Darwinian selection with Mendelian genetics, is entirely absent. Concepts such as mutations and the mechanics of speciation are found only in the textbook for the 11th grade. However, this textbook belongs to the previous educational standard. The new standard does not include it. Even if we assume that senior students continue to study using the old books, we face a statistical reality. Nearly 1.5 million students never reach these explanations. Why? Because they leave the general school system to pursue vocational training after the 9th grade. In the past year alone, approximately 60% of graduates opted for colleges and vocational schools rather than continuing to the 10th and 11th grades. Consequently, these students never receive the textbook that explains what evolution actually is. Therefore, for a vast majority of Russian schoolchildren, the theory of evolution has effectively already been canceled, not by a ban but by structural omission. While there are passionate teachers, specialized classes, private institutions, curious children, and vigilant parents who operate outside these official instructions, teaching and learning, as is best for knowledge or university entrance exams, they are the exception, not the rule. The Commission on Pseudoscience of the Russian Academy of Sciences recently issued an official statement defending the theory of evolution in response to the scandalous proposal by the aforementioned official. But we must ask, is there anything left in the school curriculum to defend? However, in these squabbles, a more profound issue is often overlooked. When the theory of evolution is debated solely as an idea that undermines the religious worldview, or conversely, when doubts about evolution are viewed as an encroachment of religious thinking, we cease to speak of it as a scientific concept. The key word here is scientific. When the discourse shifts to worldview vs. religion, the subject becomes ideological. It ceases to be an exploration of biological reality. This ideological framing makes even legitimate scientific criticism of Darwin's theory seem dangerous or inadmissible to the pro-science camp. It risks being perceived as support for religious obscurantism. This defensive posture makes it harder to notice a nuanced reality. Darwin's theory never set out to prove the non-existence of God. It did not disprove a creator. Therefore, It should not be surprising that major religious institutions, such as the Catholic Church, which shepherds approximately 1.4 billion people, have no fundamental conflict with Darwinism or the broader theory of evolution. The Vatican has long held that evolution is compatible with the Bible, provided that Scripture is not interpreted with crude literalism. They view evolution as part of a divine plan. It seems that the Russian Orthodox Church has also decided to align with this view. The Patriarch of Moscow recently stated that evolution does not contradict God's plan. This clears the stage for the true topic of this lecture: the real problems of the theory of evolution. These are not theological problems. They are biological problems. This is a fascinating subject, rarely discussed outside of academic journals. It is not a debate between atheism and theism. It is a debate between biologists. It is a story of how the most advanced science of life is revealing a picture far more complex, diverse, and surprising than the standard textbook model. It is a story of how scientists, agnostics and atheists alike, are arguing ferociously among themselves about how evolution works. As we delve deeper into the data, the absolute, monolithic role of genes, the central tenet of 20th century biology, is increasingly coming under question. We are discovering that the book of life is not merely a static script written in DNA. Let us transport ourselves to the arid landscapes of the Mojave Desert in California. Here, amidst the sand and rock, we find the creosote bush. To the untrained eye, it is merely a shrub. To the chemist and the ecologist, it is a fortress of toxicity. The leaves of the creosote bush are coated in a resinous substance rich in nordyhydroguaretic acid and other phenolic compounds. This resin is a potent chemical defense mechanism designed by millions of years of selection to repel herbivores. It is toxic. It shuts down kidney function. It is unpalatable. For most animals, eating the creosote bush is a death sentence. Yet there is an exception: the desert woodrat or pack rat. These specific rodents consume the creosote bush. In fact, they feed almost exclusively on this plant, which would kill their biological cousins in short order. Furthermore, because no other animal can tolerate this toxicity, the desert woodrat faces no competition for this food source. The ecological niche belongs entirely to them. This is a massive evolutionary advantage. The standard Darwinian assumption would be that these rats evolved a genetic mutation, a change in their liver enzymes or cellular transport mechanisms, that allows them to detoxify the resin. We would search their genome for the creosote tolerance gene. We would be wrong. The desert woodrat does not owe this superpower to its own genes. It owes it to the genes of another kingdom entirely. The ability to digest the toxin resides in the microbiome, the complex community of bacteria living within the woodrat's intestines. These specialized microbes possess the metabolic machinery to break down the resinous toxins before they can harm the rat. Crucially, this survival trait is not passed from parent to offspring through the germline. It is passed through behavior. The woodrats engage in coprophagia, the consumption of feces. Young rats eat the feces of their mothers or other adults, thereby inoculating themselves with the necessary bacteria. They acquire the shield against toxicity from the environment through social interaction, not through chromosomal inheritance. This is an evolutionary adaptation that bypasses the host's genome. If you treat the rats with antibiotics, killing their gut flora, they lose the ability to eat the creosote bush. They lose their evolutionary advantage, yet their DNA remains unchanged. This challenges the strict view that all adaptive traits must be hard-coded in the animal's own genetic library. Now, let us shift our gaze from the dry desert to the cold, churning waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Here we observe the humpback whale. These leviathans have developed a highly sophisticated method for hunting sand lances, small, eel-like fish that are notoriously difficult to catch because they burrow into the sand and scatter quickly. For a long time, the sand lance was a difficult prey item. But then, a specific behavior emerged among the whales. The whale strikes the surface of the water with its massive fluke. This impact creates a powerful hydrodynamic shockwave. This shockwave travels through the water and concusses the fish, stunning them. Once the fish are immobilized, the whale can easily consume them. This lobtail feeding technique is not an instinct. It is not written in the whale's DNA. It was invented or discovered by a specific individual or group of whales. Then it spread. Other whales watched. They imitated. The behavior spread horizontally through the population, like a meme or a fashion trend. It also began to spread vertically from mother to calf. This is culture. In biology, we define culture as information capable of affecting behavior that is acquired from other individuals through teaching, imitation, and other forms of social transmission. The whales are evolving a better way to survive, but the mechanism of transmission is cultural, not genetic. If a virus wiped out the specific whales that know this trick, the trait would vanish from the population, even if the whale's DNA remained perfect. Evolution here is acting on a behavioral pattern, not a nucleotide sequence. We move now to a third example, perhaps the most unsettling of all for the traditional geneticist. This takes us into the controlled environment of a laboratory and into the realm of epigenetics, the study of changes in organisms caused by modification of gene expression, rather than alteration of the genetic code itself. Consider the experiment conducted by Brian Diaz and Carrie Ressler, published in the prestigious journal Nature Neuroscience. They worked with laboratory mice. They exposed these mice to the scent of acetophenone. Acetophenone has a pleasant, sweet smell, reminiscent of cherries or almonds. However, in this experiment, the scent was paired with a negative stimulus. Every time the male mice smelled the cherries, they received a mild electric shock to their feet. Quickly, the mice learned to associate the smell with pain. They developed a fear response. They would tremble or freeze whenever the scent of acetophenone was introduced, even without the shock. This is standard Pavlovian conditioning. The researchers then took these male mice and bred them with females that had never been exposed to the experiment. The fathers were removed immediately. The offspring were raised without ever meeting their fathers and without ever experiencing the foot shocks. When these offspring grew up, the researchers introduced the smell of acetophenone. Remarkably, the offspring panicked. They exhibited the same fear response to the cherry scent as their fathers. They were born afraid of a specific smell they had never encountered, a smell their fathers had learned to fear. The researchers went further. They bred the second generation to produce a third, the grandchildren of the original shocked mice, who had never met their fathers or grandfathers and never been shocked, also exhibited the fear response to acetophenone. How is this possible? The researchers examined the anatomy of the mice. They found that the mice had an increased number of neurons sensitive to this specific odor in their noses and deeper in the brain were unchanged. However, they found changes in the methylation of the DNA. Methylation is an epigenetic marker, a chemical tag, attached to the DNA molecule that acts like a switch, turning genes on or off, or regulating their volume. The gene responsible for the M71 odor receptor was hypomethylated and therefore cannot be passed to offspring. If you work out at the gym, your children are not born with big muscles. But here, a psychological trauma and a learned association were passed down. The barrier appeared to be permeable. These examples, the woodrat's external gut microbiome, the whale's cultural transmission of hunting techniques, and the mica's epigenetic inheritance of fear, suggest that genes are not the sole architects of evolution. They are not the only way biological information moves across time. This realization has led to a significant fissure in the scientific community. A civil war of ideas played out on the pages of the world's most prestigious scientific journals, such as Nature. In 2014, Nature published a landmark exchange titled, "Does Evolutionary Theory Need a Rethink?" On one side stood the reformers, led by Kevin Lalland and his colleagues. They argued for an extended evolutionary synthesis is too gene-centric. They argued that we must formally integrate 4 new concepts into the core of evolutionary theory. 1. Developmental bias. The way an organism grows limits or directs the ways it can evolve. Evolution isn't just random mutation. It's channeled by the physics of the body. 2. Plasticity. Organisms can change their phenotype, don't exist. They acknowledged they exist. However, they argued that these are merely proximate causes. They contended that the modern synthesis is robust enough to absorb these findings without a radical paradigm shift. Their counterarguments were formidable. Epigenetics is transient. Most epigenetic marks are wiped clean during fertilization. Cases like the cherry-fearing mice are rare exceptions, and the effects usually fade after a few generations. They are not stable enough to drive long-term evolution in the way DNA does. Plasticity is genetic. The ability to be plastic do not. The danger of dilution. They argued that adding too many soft factors like plasticity and culture muddies the mathematical precision of population genetics. They fear a return to soft inheritance, or Lamarckism, which they view as a step backward. The conservatives argued that the standard theory functions perfectly well. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. They see the reformers as seeking novelty for the sake of novelty. The reformers, conversely, argue that by ignoring these factors or treating them as minor footnotes, we are missing the full picture of how life diversifies. They argue that the gene-centric view is a reductionist oversimplification that fails to explain the speed and complexity of adaptation we observe in the real world. This debate is not settled. It is the vibrant, beating heart of modern theoretical biology. It is a sign of a healthy science. Unlike a dogma, which is brittle and bans dissent, science thrives on this friction. So, when we return to the initial societal context, the calls to ban Darwin in schools, or the labeling of evolution as a religious or atheistic stance, we see how incredibly shallow those public debates are compared to the reality. The real action is not between a priest and a biologist. It is between a biologist who believes phenotype leads genotype and a biologist who believes genotype leads phenotype. The theory of evolution is not a static commandment written in stone in 1859. It is a living, evolving framework. It is currently expanding to include the microbiome, the epigenome, and the culture of animals. It is becoming less deterministic and more interconnected. The absolute rule of the gene is being challenged by a more holistic view of the organism in its environment. This detailed, messy, and fiercely debated reality is what makes biology so profoundly interesting. It is a tragedy that this richness is what is missing from the textbooks, replaced by rote memorization or, worse, by silence. The problem isn't that Darwin is spiritually decaying children. The problem is that the version of Darwin they are,